you have to give your workers, your employees, your team, the tools, safe tools. If you don't, they're going to use.
This week on the Shameless Podcast.
A lot of organizations, a data leak is a game ender. If you've ever been involved in a startup, you know what startup security looks like. You start talking about connecting a vibe coding platform to your proprietary data. Stop. It's not safe. I think the carrot is much more effective than the stick, right? In that if you're trying to govern with punishment and, blocking websites from your corporate network and all of these things, it's not going to work. Okay. No amount of technology or policies can really fix culture. You've got to get AI out of IT.
Wow.
That's not the right place for it.
Hold on. Whoa.
It needs to be aligned with the top level business objectives and strategy at the highest of level. And that is not something that IT is built for.
All failure is failure to adapt. All success is successful adaptation.
Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story.
Shameless.
Shameless family, welcome today. I am your host, Dzikamai Gangaidzo, a mining engineer, but also the host of the Shameless Podcast. And today we've got Hunter Jensen, or is it Jensen Hunter?
Jensen
Hunter. Absolute pleasure having you today. And, one of the major things that we were talking about just when we started recording was how fast the world is changing. And in that fast pace, how does innovation, privacy, security sort of fit into this world where everything is changing? But as a business, you also want to be at the front of it, but you also don't want to be exposing your business to unnecessary risk. And I think, Jensen, you might just have a little bit to say about that. And I'm really excited to talk to you around this topic. So welcome to the Shameless Podcast.
Thank you. Hunter is the first name. You can call me Hunter.
Okay, I can call it Hunter. That is so much better.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I think that is top of mind right now for all company leaders, right? Like, it's time to innovate. We have this new technology. It's incredibly powerful, but it also presents tremendous amount of risk. The biggest risk is, for a lot of companies at least, is the kind of leaking of confidential data outside of your organization, right? And, as a leader, what do you do about that? You need to innovate. You know that. You have a board of directors that's saying, what's our AI strategy? And you're saying, well, I don't know. What is that? I don't know where to start even with something like that. And what it comes down to for me is you have to give your workers, your employees, your team, the tools, safe tools. If you don't, they're going to use stuff anyway that they shouldn't be, because everybody else is, and they don't want to get left behind. And so as a leader, it is incumbent upon you to provide them with these safe tools to access this new technology in order to protect your business, to protect your data, and ultimately your business. Because a lot of organizations, a data leak is a game ender, right? If you're a law firm and your client data makes it into the training data set for OpenAI, goodbye.
Yeah.
You're toast. It's over. Right. And so, but the kind of allure of these large language models are for people, they want to use them, right?
Yeah.
They're so interesting and powerful and helpful that they really need them. And so it's my belief that we have to provide those tools to keep, the usage of it safe. And I don't just mean the software tools. That's a huge piece of it, but also your governance policy. Do you have an AI governance policy? If not, you need to start working on that. It's important. What are your team members? What are they allowed to use? What are they not allowed to use? Where can they use certain tools and why? And are they being held accountable to what's coming out of these tools, right? There always needs to be a human in the loop on these things. These are that your governance policy is another tool that you have to provide to your team, and it gives them guardrails. It allows them a safe space to innovate, right? Because ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is innovate with this new technology.
So hold on. You know what? You've jumped like straight into it, and I haven't even like introduced the topic first and foremost, but secondly, who on earth are you? So firstly, I'm gonna give the topic of today's episode is AI without compromise: how leaders can embrace innovation without sacrificing privacy. And the reason why you might be incredibly insightful to sort of hear your opinion, hear your views upon this, and I'd love for you to maybe introduce yourself and please don't be shy about the amazing things that you've been up to. Please take it away.
Sure. Yeah. So I am the founder CEO of Barefoot Solutions. We're a custom software development shop. Been at this for over 20 years. Got my start teaching myself how to write code while I was in college by just checking books out of the library and getting gigs on Craigslist. Formally founded Barefoot after college, and we've kind of ridden the wave of technology for the last 20 plus years. Started off building WordPress websites, had one of the first 100 mobile apps in the App Store when that came online in '08. Then we got into the Internet of Things and connected devices and medical device apps, things like that. Then we got into blockchain and a wild ride in crypto. And then came, machine learning and data science. AI has been around for a really long time, well before, November 2022, when generative AI kind of, opened the eyes of the world of what the technology was capable of. And so that's, kind of been the latest cycle. As we're always looking to innovate and adapt, most recently, we've made the decision to build a product, which is the first time we've built a product, and we're shifting our business model away from a pure services model into a product plus service component to it to help small and medium-sized businesses deploy safe AI platforms inside of their organizations.
And that idea of moving from a service to a product, my question to you is, we see a lot of people who end up vibe coding. And what are your greatest concerns around sort of that leading with that approach, the way you have somebody essentially vibe coding using, really powerful tools to get you a good chunk of the way. And maybe that's what they do. You get the product, you implement it, and it's essentially you've spent less, gotten a product, but it's really been built through chatbots, not chatbots, but large language models.
Yeah, I mean, the state of vibe coding right now is that it's really powerful. It's great for prototyping. It's great if you want to build a tool that just you or maybe you and a handful of people are going to use. It doesn't scale and it doesn't work in a full-blown production environment. There are just missing pieces to it. There's like a last mile problem of like, okay, well, where are we hosting this and what kind of infrastructure do we need to host this? And how are we integrating with our single sign-on or with this old system that doesn't have an API? And there's all these other things that vibe coding is not great at now. I'm not saying it won't get there. I think it probably will get there.
Yeah.
But now it doesn't output something that I would call like production ready or scalable. What I tell people right now is, yeah, if you want to just build out a prototype to test it out, see if it works for you, great. Vibe coding is a great solution for that. If you're ready to bring it to kind of the production ready level, then you still today need engineers to do that work. But I don't know how long I'm going to be saying that because it's getting better and better.
But then from a security point of view, right? And I can really appreciate that we talk about the component of the software. Then you could even talk about the component of the hardware, but then there's also the component of the process, policy, governance, right? And so across all three segments, would you say that vibe coding actually addresses them adequately and provides you the largest, or not the largest, but a safe enough environment that you don't have hardware that then could easily be compromised? You don't have software that could easily be compromised. Then your policy and governance also provides that guardrail that keep you in check.
No. across all three, really. Something I like to remind people is that these are startups. If you've ever been involved in a startup, you know what startup security looks like.
There's nothing.
It's not, there's nothing there. It's the bare minimum so that you can get insurance is basically your security. And that stays that way until you start to get serious and start to mature as a business. And so, one of the things about vibe coding is that you're really reliant on these third-party systems, right? They host them. They generate the code. They have access to all the code. They have access to the data that gets input into these things. And they want you to use it in just any sort of way you can possibly imagine, right? That's the stage that they're at, which means that like governance and sovereignty, these are not things that they care about. They aren't. They just want users. That's the stage of the companies that these companies are in. And so, you start talking about connecting a vibe coding platform to your proprietary data. Stop. It's not safe. It's not safe right now. Now, these companies, again, they'll mature, and I might be saying something different a year from now. But right now, like I said, if you want to build a tool for yourself, great, go for it. But when you're starting to talk about something that's going to be in use in your organization with a bunch of different people, that's not a solution for you right now. You need something far more mature, far more secure. You need transparency. You need governance. You need all of these things that come with a mature software development lifecycle process that don't come with vibe.
And so then when you then go down that sort of route of a more established or, getting engineers to actually build it out, have you found some constraints between or, that push and pull between innovation and privacy, a sort of a paradox? And I'm going to ask you that question from two perspectives. That is from the engineers who are trying to innovate and who are trying to punch beyond and compete against sort of those people within a vibe coding space. And then the other side is leaders who either want to do more but are being held accountable from a board of directors or from a lack of understanding or information. And, those two, in my mind, they might be very two different mindsets, two different problems that people are trying to solve for.
Yeah. So, I am an engineer. I'm a software developer. I don't write a lot of code anymore, but I was quite good in my day. And, from an engineering perspective, there are very powerful code generators that I don't consider vibe coding because they're wielded by engineers and it just accelerates their ability to create or to test or to build, right? It handles the easy stuff that just takes time and lets you elevate your work to solve like the hard problems. That's not vibe coding to me. That's just using the best tools that are available to you. And, any software developer, especially if you're starting out, should really be looking at how to integrate these tools into their workflows. But at the same time, more traditional software development, lifecycle governance applies. It's still your code. You are accountable for that code. It needs to be tested. It needs to be reviewed. It's not this thing can just write it all for me. It's a tool to help you write it better and faster and to maybe teach you things that you don't know about. And so in that regard, I do think that the engineers are uniquely positioned to be able to innovate in a safe space. As long as at the end of the day, that's your code and you take responsibility for it, then a lot of the guardrails that are already in place still work for that style of engineering, right? And so the engineers are actually able to innovate in that way, in a way that a lot of others are not, right? The marketers that are using vibe coding platforms are not accountable for the code that's being generated. They're not able to review it. And that's where things get a little dicey, right? Or they don't really understand. And I don't mean to pick on marketers. I mean, not anyone that's a non-engineer.
But we know the marketers are the ones that are most likely to be.
They're sick and tired of having to get things approved from a backlog and wait for engineering because they've got a million ideas and they just want to go, right?
Yeah.
And so these vibe coding platforms are a
It
great
works.
solution for that.
Yeah.
But, where it gets sticky, and this is where the leaders have a very different viewpoint, is really when you start to need to incorporate proprietary confidential data, intellectual property, and other things onto systems that haven't been vetted and aren't necessarily meeting your security standards. And so leaders often want to pump the brakes and say, wait, we need to make sure that all the guardrails are still here that have been working for us before you just run and gun, right? Which is what vibe coding is. Or even just before you start uploading Excel spreadsheets into ChatGPT that you shouldn't, right?
Yep.
That's happening all the time right now, right? And so that's why, like I mentioned earlier, as a leader, you need to give them the tools. They're going to do it one way or another. And it's your responsibility to provide tools for your team so that they can leverage all of this technology.
But hold on. So sometimes as a leader, the tools that we see have got a lot of hype, media attention, but we actually don't know much about them. We don't know, it's still quite early on to really appreciate the full extent of the risks that you're sitting on. Would you say that something that exists and that's fair? And therefore, you'll always be a second mover in a space if privacy and security are important to you, and therefore you will never lead that innovation challenge.
I don't agree with that.
Why?
I don't agree with it. You have to own it. It has to be yours.
Okay.
Where you get stuck is relying on third parties.
Okay.
They will cause you to fall behind. But if you own your stack and you own these tools and you control them, then you can innovate.
Okay.
That, like I said, that creates the safe space for people to get creative and to innovate, but you've got to own it. Trust ChatGPT or OpenAI. You can't. They're too new. They're too new. Can you trust Microsoft and Google? Probably, in that, they have been around for long enough and are regulated heavily enough and have, mature enough security postures that those are we've already decided those are safe places for our data. Here, every company is using Microsoft 365 or G Suite, for their emails.
They've already got everything.
Right. And so, a question I get a lot of the times is like, well, where do we even start? And I actually, I do recommend get your team members seats to Microsoft Copilot or to Gemini. Gemini just got incredibly good after being behind since 2017. When, interestingly, it was a Google researcher that published the paper that kind of was the discovery of transformer models. It was called Attention is All You Need, and it was in 2017. And then they just Microsoft and OpenAI just like ate their lunch, but they finally caught up. So pay for seats. They're cheap. Start to understand how they might use them and how it's improving their workflows. And, that's a nice, easy, fast, and cheap way to dip your toe in the water and start understanding what the capabilities might be. Now, they fall short. They will fall short. That's not the full solution yet, but it's a good starting point.
But then, that is on the assumption that you have the skills in-house, right? So if you don't have the skills in-house, I mean, you can get me a seat and I'm not going to really get you far. I guess that's also to a degree why you started sort of Compass. And so where do you see sort of Compass and a service or a product of a type falling within a space where people want to innovate, but maybe don't have the capacity to build their own things within their own space?
That's exactly right. So, Goldman Sachs, they have something called GSAI, right? It's their internal AI platform, and it's very powerful, and they built it themselves because they have the resources to build it themselves. Smaller companies do not have the resources to build their own stuff, nor should they be expected to. And that's exactly why we built Compass, is to provide a solution that you own. It's self-hosted, right? It's on your servers. It lives behind your firewall, which means it can communicate with your other systems and not have to worry about data kind of leaking out or ending up in training data sets or making publicly available, right? So when you outgrow your Copilot or your, Gemini or what have you, that's when Compass would come in. Right? We're seeing that there's a lot of interest from our workers. They want to be using these tools. They have some interesting use cases, but it's not working all that great because there are some major limitations to these platforms. Let's invest. Let's build our AI platform and let's make it our own, right? We can use it to enforce governance, right? We can instruct the models on what is and is not allowed. We can use our single sign-on with it so that people only have access to what they're supposed to have access to, right? You can leverage all of your access control, your security posture, your governance when you own it and it's yours, right? And so that's why we built Compass. And that's why I say it's a product and a service. It's a product because we have a baseline product, but the service is then implementing it for you and making it work for your business and your companies and integrating with your systems and your workflows and all the rest of it, right? Like that's the vision here. And I think that's what I think most companies are going to need their own internal AI platform and soon.
I mean, I struggle to understand why you use the word most and not all, because it, I just cannot believe that there is going to be a single company out there that can afford not to have their own AI, anything really. And so then my next question to you then comes on from the idea of theory versus practicality within an AI governance space, right? Something that is very easy to sort of talk about, but now when it's actually time to put it into place, what have you found have been some of the greatest hurdles when you then go, we've got government, we're going to be enforcing one, two, and three things, but we also want to ensure that we still manage to foster that innovative nature and, collaborative nature, but there are guardrails and you have to play by certain rule books, especially when you go, everyone in this world is using ChatGPT, right? And it's so hard to control. What do you say are some of the biggest challenges, some of the most impractical, guardrails that are put up, and then how do you combat some of that?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I'll start with that. I don't like it's really hard and it's always been hard even before generative AI, right? It's kind of at its core, it's a fundamental problem of like how do you get your team to follow the rules, right? And to me, I think the carrot is much more effective than the stick, right? In that if you're trying to govern with punishment and, blocking websites from your corporate network and all of these things, it's not going to work. Okay. And it's going to create a culture that you don't want. Right. But rather if you, and I keep beating on this same drum, but it really applies here as well, which is if you give them the safe space, then it doesn't become this negative force where you're trying to enforce your governance, but rather a place that has the governance built in. Your team can feel like, well, if I can do it here, it's probably okay. But then there's also, it's more than anything, it's cultural. You have to be able to trust your team. If you can't trust your team, you've got bigger problems with your culture, right? And when you can trust your team and they're aware of not just the policy, but the why behind the policy, which is more important than the policy itself, is the why, then it's self-governing to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
And so no amount of technology or policies can really fix culture. Like that's about leadership, right? And so to me, the safest and most innovative places are the ones with strong leadership that know how to build a culture of trust where you can trust your team and they trust you and your leadership to guide the organization to be successful, right? So that, and I started by saying that's hard because that's hard.
Anything to do with people and cultures.
It's hard. But the other thing that I've seen, so you asked practical, right?
Yeah.
Like let's get practical. We've been doing monthly lunch and learns or show and tells, if you want to call them that. where people at the organization get up and say, look at what I've been doing with this new technology. Look how cool this is. And it creates a culture of collaboration, of learning, and, of transparency. People understand what other people are doing and that it's okay, or maybe that it's not okay. And we learn that, right, at the same time. But telling from the top down, you must adopt this technology, it doesn't really work very well. But when it's like bottom up or organic or horizontal, and after the show and tell, so-and-so goes and knocks on their office and said, that was really cool. Can you show me how I could do that with this other thing? Right? Like that to me is where you create this culture of collaboration and of innovation, is when you really promote sharing, like the sharing, because this is new for all of us. Anybody that says they're an expert, I would be a little dubious, because they say it takes 10,000 hours, to
Yeah.
become a master at something. Has anybody spent 10,000 hours with this stuff? Very few people.
After 10,000 hours, it's probably out of date anyway. So
Right. So the whole paradigm has shifted.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
We're all learning together, right? We're all kind of building the plane as we fly it to a certain
Yeah.
extent, because of the speed at which technology is changing now.
And so one thing that I've always really struggled with is the idea of the speed at which technology is changing, then our ability to change that fast as well. And what are the risks with that? Because, I mean, we talk about governance, but if things are changing so much so fast, then those governance or those policies, I mean, you're chasing your tail at some point, really. How do businesses then ensure that they can either move with it, or they are adaptive, or they are not necessarily constraining themselves with the policy to allow for that growth and that movement? What is your take on that? Because it's about change, but also matching the change, but that change is so rapid that
Yeah, it's hard. It's harder. It's hardest for the large organizations,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The oil tankers turn slow, right? It's actually, to me, a fairly unique time in the history of like digital, where the startups and the smaller companies have a pretty significant advantage. You got Salesforce over here kind of bolting AI onto all of the of technical debt that they have, right?
Yeah.
But the smaller companies don't have as much technical debt, and they can kind of start fresh, and it puts them in a unique position. But, one of the things that I think we're going to see soon, some organizations have already done this, is you've got to get AI out of IT.
Wow.
That's not the right place for it.
Hold on. Whoa, that is, anybody who is in IT is gonna hate the fact that you said that. That is like almost like, who else is gonna then take it if it's not IT? Says an IT person, obviously. I'm with you on that.
The CAIO, it needs to be a C-level
Okay.
operation.
Okay.
And and that team will ask IT to deploy the solutions that we've evaluated and make sure we have the infrastructure to support it. But right now, IT is making these decisions, and that is problematic.
But
They are not.
why'd you say that's problematic? I mean, in terms of the skill sets, they probably have the closest match skill sets to around that sort of environment, wouldn't you say?
Well, when it comes to actually implementing and deploying, certainly that is still the job of IT. But where it's not aligning is, and why I say it needs to be C-level, is it needs to be aligned with the top level business objectives and
Yeah.
strategy at the highest of level. And you need to make sure you get your ROI, right? And that means you need to calculate that ROI. You need to look at the use cases and understand where it's going to impact the income statement, the P&L of the
Yeah.
business, right? Before anything gets deployed, that calculation needs to be done. It needs to be forecasted and estimated. That is not something that IT is built for, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's why I think it needs to be elevated to the C-suite. They need a seat at the table. They need a team. IT is part of that, but it is not the solution to that. And so I think there's going to be a proliferation of these new. I'm already seeing fractional CAIOs. I met one just the other day.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. And so I do think that, because the original question here was, how do we adapt?
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is there needs to be someone very high level, very strategic, with their eye on the ball, on that ball specifically.
Yeah.
They know what's going on in AI. They know what models are coming out next month. They know where 6 to 9 months from now looks like, and they are preparing the organization and have the tools and the budget and the resources to do it. And we have to empower the AI team, right, to make sure that we stay current and we adapt quickly. Someone to say, hey, in 3 months, there's going to be this new thing available. And I know that marketing is going to want to use it, but we're going to need to update our governance policy so that they know how they can and cannot use it. And so we're ahead of it, right? Versus, hey, I just found out that marketing is using this thing. And it's not really, our policy doesn't really address
Allow
that.
for it. Yeah.
Allow for it, right? And so what I'm saying in a very short, concise way is someone at the C level needs to be focused specifically on AI to be able to adapt at the speed of which the space is changing.
Yeah. And the closer you are to the problems that give you that ROI, then the better it is for you to be able to sort of link that, but the deployment still occurs within the space of IT.
That's exactly right. But we need our ROIs. We need to
that's it.
understand, and they need to be measured. And we need to follow up and make sure we're hitting the KPIs that will drive the ROI. And someone needs to do that job, and it's not IT.
And the beauty, I think, is that in this conversation, I feel it's reminded us, or really reminded me, that AI revolution does require potentially some level of compromise, but if anything, it requires a large level of adaptation and ownership. It's about building that culture that allows that is real to the idea that people are going to look and use some of these solutions. And if you just sit there and wait or try to constrain, use the stick as opposed to the carrot, there's no way that you're going to actually be in the front and innovate and lead, which leads me straight into the quote of the episode, which, damn, time has flown. We could have talked about this for another hour, but I have to get into the quote of the episode. And the quote of the episode is, all failure is failure to adapt. All success is successful adaptation. All failure is failure to adapt. All success is successful adaptation. And the reason why I actually found this really befitting to this episode is because when I listened to your story and you start off with a WordPress, actually, one thing that you didn't say to everybody else was you dropped out of computer science to then pursue a double major in something completely unrelated, but then you still pursued this wonderful passion of yours within coding and computer science anyways. And with that, I guess you complemented sort of one world with another world, and you then got into a process where you were writing code, really good at code, and you found yourself just suddenly having a business. And that business grew as you grew more people, WordPress, moving over to more nuanced work, and then engineering hours, and within, is it Barefoot Solutions or Barefoot Solutions, right? You then found yourself doing well and sitting at this current paradigm at this moment where we've got this real big leap in AI and the use of AI. You identified that it is important to adapt, and you took on the idea of a product within Compass. And the beauty of how I've understood that move and that transition for you is because you've seen that in this modern day and age, you need to ensure that you've got the right tools for the people in the team. The tools are safe and very good to use from a governance point of view. And that needs to be housed and held within your own environment, within your own firewalls. Because it is one thing to open up ChatGPT and spew out all your private records, upload all your Excels and do the graphing and everything like that. Or to hire a vibe coder who's going to essentially use a platform. We won't name any platforms, but at the end of the day, you are locked in and you are essentially, you're building something that is not necessarily fit across software, hardware, and governance to be able to provide a safe space. And in this current world where things are changing and they are changing rapidly, what I've really understood is that we can't afford to let individuals, and we use marketing as an example, no, no shame to any marketers, but we can't afford to let people within the business lead without those guardrails, to run without those guardrails, because in the absence of those guardrails, we'll find ourselves being negligent. We'll find ourselves putting certain people at risk and certain information at risk. And really, it is a moment and an opportunity for us to adapt, to gain a lot more productivity, but to still be able to do it in a safe way by giving teams tools. And you repeated that over and over, bringing them safe tools that allow for businesses to be able to be protected. Within that, we open up the opportunity for people to be accountable, for people to be able to work within guardrails, for software and governance within policy, or software that allows and manages both the governance and the policy. And I think your experiences within the medical field with medical devices would have shaped a little bit of how you look at certain things as well, because there's no more sensitive data than when you talk about medical data. And though vibe coding might be fantastic for prototyping, low use in terms of a few people, it's not scalable and it's not currently in the full production state where you get a vibe code that gets you to full production state, because you don't get that hosting, the legacy integration across different spaces. And yes, you said you might have a different way or a different view on it next year, but in this moment in time, there's a lot that needs to be said and a lot needs to be thought about for us to be able to adapt successfully. And that adaptation successfully, if you've got the resources in-house, like Goldman Sachs with the GSAI, then great, fine, build it and really frame it out. But if you don't, there are companies such as yourself that do offer and that opportunity for people to take those steps. But one thing that I loved was that the first steps that people can take is those trusted Microsoft or Gemini with the Copilot, and really just getting seats that are relatively low cost. Dip your toes in the water, and at the end, start to build an understanding of what you could get and how you can move. And when you open that opportunity, you're leading with the carrot as opposed to the stick. And when you lead with the carrot, you build a culture that really gives people space and doesn't build that negative space where people are doing things in secret, but still doing it and using tools that might not be safe to use. And you can't fix something, you can't adapt fast enough if you don't have the right culture within that space. And I love that whole concept of the monthly show and tells, because it brings people into a space where they feel comfortable to say, look, we do this, we can do this, we love to do this, we're using this, and you build that into the idea. And if I have to say one thing that I really enjoyed about this is you telling me that AI should not sit in IT, because at the end, when we look at the ability to bring ROI and the ability for us to integrate the problem with the solution, we needed to be at a C-suite level, and we needed to be able to adapt to the problems of the business. And fine, deployment can be sitting within IT. But for us to be able to be agile, to be adaptable, we really need to reshape the way that we look at AI, how we deploy it, how we use it, how we safeguard the innovation of the business as well as the information of the business. Hunter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today. I have found this incredibly insightful. I don't even think we've touched the surface. And for that reason, I would love for you to let our listeners know where they might be able to sort of find you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dzikamai. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can check out our website, barefootlabs.ai. And as a thanks to you for hosting me, I encourage any of your listeners to email me. It's hunter@barefootlabs.ai. And in the opening line, say, I heard you on the Shameless Podcast. And if you do that, I promise I will respond and we can have a dialogue. You don't need to be a potential customer or anything like that. But just make sure you say that, because otherwise I get a lot of emails and I'll probably disregard it. But as a thank you, please email me and we can have a conversation. I love talking about this stuff.
That's absolutely perfect. You know, this is a community. It's a space where we all look to learn, we all look to grow. and we'll look to support each other. And Hunter, this has been incredibly insightful, and I really hope and I know that it is going to be definitely insightful for a lot of people. And for anybody who also found this pretty interesting, there is a T4L course, AI stacking, that really touches on how you can use some of these tools. However, it also touches on the idea of privacy and how to do it safely. Hunter really went into a lot of depth around some of these elements, and I really do think that this conversation as well as that really do complement each other. Hunter, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for taking the time out today.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.